Snow fell in thick, quiet sheets, turning the city into something muted and unreal. Christmas lights climbed the glass skin of the financial tower, red and gold reflections trembling across frozen windows. From the street, the building looked alive, warm, prosperous, untouchable. Inside, it was cold in a different way. Evan Cole pushed his cleaning cart down the executive corridor, the small wheels whispering over polished marble. The sound echoed too loudly in the emptiness. It was Christmas Eve, close to midnight, and most of the city had already gone home to warmth and family. Evan was finishing the last stretch of his night shift, shoulders heavy, eyes tired in a way sleep never seemed to fix. He was 36, broad-backed from years of physical work, his hair already showing threads of gray that had nothing to do with age. Every step he took was measured, careful. Rent was due in a week. The heating bill sat unopened on his kitchen counter. And somewhere across town, his daughter Lily was asleep in her grandmother's spare room. Curled under a quilt Evan had folded years ago when his life still made sense. He paused at the end of the hall and leaned on the handle of his cart, rubbing a hand over his face. Lily had asked him earlier, her voice soft through the phone, if Santa would still know where to find her. Evan had told her, yes, Santa always found kids who waited. It was easier than explaining why he couldn't pick her up himself tonight. The hum of the building filled the silence, the steady breath of the ventilation system, the distant click of pipes adjusting to the cold. Evan glanced at his watch. 10 more minutes, he told himself. Then he could go. As he turned the corner, something stopped him. A door. It was barely open, just a narrow gap. But it didn't belong that way. The executive conference rooms were always locked after hours. Always. Evan knew the building better than most people who worked in it. He had learned its habits the way some men learned the moods of the sea. The gap caught the light, a thin line of brightness against the dark corridor. Evan hesitated. He could walk past. Someone else's problem. That was usually the smarter choice. A memory surfaced uninvited. His former supervisor's voice, clipped and disappointed. You're reliable, Evan, but you lack ambition. You don't stay late. You don't push. He had wanted to say, I leave because my daughter waits for me. Instead, he had nodded. 2 months later, the promotion went to someone else. Loyalty didn't pay. Kindness didn't advance careers. Evan had learned that lesson well. Still, he stepped closer. The door opened into a wide, dimly lit room. The long table gleamed faintly under recessed lights. At first, he saw nothing out of place. Then he heard it. A small, uneven breath, hitching like someone trying not to cry. Evan's chest tightened. He pushed the door open another inch. Hello? He called softly, keeping his voice low. No answer. He moved inside, his boots silent against the carpet, eyes adjusting. Beneath the table, half hidden by leather chairs, was a small shape. A child. She was curled into herself, knees pulled tight to her chest, thin shoulders shaking. Blonde hair fell across her face in tangled strands. Her hands were clamped over her mouth as if sound itself was dangerous. Evan stopped a few feet away. Hey, he said gently. It's okay. I'm not here to scare you. The girl didn't look up. Her eyes were wide and wet, fixed on the floor. Evan didn't reach for her. He remembered Lily at that age. How sudden movements could turn fear into panic. Instead, he did the only thing that had ever worked. He kept the door open. Then he lowered himself to one knee until his eyes were level with the space beneath the table. Slowly, he shrugged off his heavy work jacket and held it out, resting it on the carpet between them. It's cold in here, he said quietly. You can have this if you want. A long moment passed. Finally, small fingers crept forward and pulled the jacket close. Evan saw how thin her arms were beneath. The expensive dress, how her hands trembled. What's your name? He asked. She swallowed. When she spoke, it was barely louder than the wind outside. Sophie. That's a good name, Evan said. I'm Evan. Her eyes flicked up to his face, searching, measuring. I don't want them to yell at me, she whispered. Please, don't let them find me. Evan felt something twist inside his chest. Slow and painful. No one's going to yell, he said. Not while I'm here. He stayed there with her, breathing steady, letting the quiet do its work. After a while, Sophie crawled out from under the table, still clutching the jacket like a shield. Can we go somewhere warmer? Evan asked. Just down the hall. She nodded once. He rose carefully and held the door wide as she stepped past him. The corridor lights reflected off the glass walls, Christmas colors fractured and cold. Evan guided her toward the elevator, keeping his body angled slightly between her and the open space. They had taken only a few steps when the alarm sounded. A sharp electronic tone sliced through the air. Red lights flashed along the ceiling. Evan froze. Footsteps thundered from the far end of the hall. Security. Sir, step away from the child. A voice barked. Sophie screamed and grabbed Evan's hand. I didn't. Evan began, but hands were already on his shoulders, pulling him back. Sophie was lifted from his side, crying, reaching for him. Please, Evan said, panic rising. She was alone. The elevator doors slid open behind the guards. And there she stood, Claire Whitmore, tall, composed, her dark coat immaculate against the chaos, eyes sharp with fear and fury. Her gaze locked onto Sophie first, relief crashing through her features, then shifted to Evan, restrained and breathless. For a single suspended moment, no one moved. Snow pressed against the windows. Christmas lights flickered, and the open door behind Evan swung slowly shut. Take my daughter, Claire Whitmore said, her voice sharp and controlled. Now. The words cut cleanly through the noise of the corridor. Security paused, recalibrated, then gently guided Sophie away. From Evan's side, the child fought it, twisting back, her small hands reaching blindly. He didn't do anything, Sophie cried. He stayed. Evan felt the weight of her fingers slip from his sleeve. The space where she'd been felt suddenly hollow. Claire stepped forward, positioning herself between Sophie and the guards with instinctive precision. She crouched, smoothing a hand over her daughter's hair, murmuring reassurances meant as much for herself as for the child. Only when Sophie was firmly in her arms did Claire rise again. Her gaze returned to Evan, steady, unreadable. Escort him to security, she said. Follow protocol. No anger. No accusation. Just process. Evan nodded once. He had learned long ago that explanations given too quickly were rarely heard. As he was led away, Sophie's sobs echoed down the corridor, each one tightening something deep in his chest. Claire watched until the corner swallowed them both. Then she straightened, every inch the executive leader the building expected her to be. Clear the floor, she said. I want a full report in 30 minutes. Grant Halden appeared at her side as if summoned by the command. He was impeccably dressed, his expression calm, his presence reassuring in the way long familiarity could be. We'll handle this carefully, Grant said. It's a sensitive situation, especially tonight. Claire nodded, already moving. Sensitive. That was the word people used when fear wore a tailored suit. As Sophie was ushered toward a private office, Claire followed, her heels clicking softly against marble. The sound pulled her backward in time without warning. She was 8 again, snow up to her ankles, a red ribbon still tied crookedly in her hair. She remembered standing on a wide porch beneath glowing Christmas lights, her breath fogging the air as she waited. Her aunt's voice had drifted through the door, low, uncomfortable. We can't take her tonight. It's not a good time. The door had closed gently, kindly, like a favor denied without cruelty. Claire had learned something important that night. Doors didn't open because you hoped they would. They opened because you had leverage, because you mattered. She blinked the memory away as Sophie was settled onto a couch, wrapped in a blanket, eyes swollen and red. Grant lingered at the threshold. Security will conduct an internal review, he said. We'll need to consider optics. An employee found alone with He found her. Claire cut in. She wasn't taken. Grant held up his hands, conciliatory. Of course. I'm just saying perception matters. Claire turned away before he could read the flicker of doubt in her expression. Evan sat alone in a small interview room on the service floor. The walls were plain, the lighting unforgiving. A camera blinked red in the corner. 2 members of internal security sat across from him, hands folded, expressions neutral. State your name and position, one said. Evan Cole, Janitorial Services. Why were you on the executive floor after hours? It was my assigned route. Why did you enter the conference room? The door was open. Why were you alone with the child? Evan met their eyes. I wasn't alone. She was. They exchanged a glance. Did you touch her? I gave her my jacket. Evan said. She was cold. Did you attempt to leave the floor with her? No. Then what were you doing? Evan thought of Sophie's shaking hands, the fear in her eyes, of Lily's voice on the phone hours earlier, asking if Santa still knew where to find her. I stayed, he said simply. I didn't leave the child. That was all. In the office upstairs, Sophie sat rigid on the couch, her knees pulled tight. Claire handed her a cup of water, crouching again to meet her eye. Sweetheart, Claire said softly, can you tell me what happened? Sophie's lip trembled. I got scared, she whispered. Everyone was loud. I didn't want to be alone. And the man? Claire asked carefully. Sophie wiped her nose with her sleeve. He sat down so I wouldn't be scared. He kept the door open. Her small hand lifted as she spoke, revealing a thin bracelet made of folded paper stars, taped carefully into a loop. Claire stared at it for a moment longer than necessary. Back in the interview room, Evan noticed the same detail. The bracelet caught the light when Sophie had reached for him earlier, a flash of color against pale skin. Lily made those. She sat at their kitchen table, folding paper with fierce concentration, giving them away to classmates, to neighbors, to anyone who looked like they might need something small and hopeful. The memory settled like a stone in Evan's chest. Hours later, when the building had quieted again, Claire stood alone in her office on the 38th floor. The city stretched below her, white and silent beneath the falling snow. The glass reflected her face back at her, composed, successful, untouchable. She pulled up the security dashboard on her tablet. It wasn't part of her job anymore, not officially, but old habits died slowly. She scrolled through the timeline. 22:41. Executive corridor feed active. 22:43. 22:49. Her finger stopped. For 6 minutes, the screen showed nothing but a static placeholder. No footage. No error alert. Just absence. Claire's reflection stared back at her from the darkened glass as the wind howled outside, rattling the windows. For the first time that night, doubt slipped past the armor she wore so well. And once inside, it refused to leave. Claire Whitmore did not schedule the meeting. That alone told Evan how serious it was. He was finishing a morning shift at a smaller annex building when his phone vibrated in his pocket. An unfamiliar number. He almost ignored it. Habit drilled into him by years of overdue bills and calls that never brought good news. But something made him answer. Mr. Cole, Claire said quietly. No title. No assistant on the line. I'd like to speak with you. Privately, if you're willing. They met that afternoon in a modest cafe 2 blocks from the tower. It wasn't the kind of place Claire was usually seen. No glass walls, no security desk, just warm light and the smell of coffee that had been brewed too long. She chose a corner table back to the wall. Evan arrived early, hands folded around a chipped mug. When Claire walked in, she looked different. Still composed, still sharp, but stripped of the building that gave her height. She didn't waste time. I handled last night poorly, she said. I followed procedure when I should have followed instinct. Evan studied her face. There was no performance in it, just restraint. I understand why you did it, he said. You were protecting your child. Claire nodded once. I've learned to do that by controlling everything around me. Sometimes I forget people aren't problems to be managed. Silence stretched between them, not awkward, just honest. I might lose my job, Evan said finally. They haven't said it outright, but I can feel it. And if that happens, he hesitated. It could affect my custody of my daughter. Claire's jaw tightened. That won't happen because of last night. I've heard that before, Evan said, not unkindly. Good intentions don't always change. Outcomes. She absorbed that. Then she said something unexpected. I don't trust easily, Claire admitted. I learned young that if I didn't stay in control, things could disappear. Evan thought of Sophie's small hands gripping his jacket, of Lily's folded stars lining the windowsill at home. We're not so different, he said. I just don't have your tools. That evening, Claire asked if she could bring Sophie by Evan's apartment. She wants to thank you herself, she said. And I want her to see where you come from. Evan hesitated. Then he nodded. The apartment was small, second-floor walk-up, paint chipped in places Evan meant to fix someday. He tidied what he could before they arrived, smoothing the couch, stacking unopened mail into a drawer. The space smelled faintly of laundry detergent and old books. Lily opened the door. She was 10, with Evan's eyes and a quiet steadiness that made her seem older. She took in Claire's coat, Sophie's careful posture, and then smiled. Hi, Lily said. I'm Lily. Sophie hovered behind her mother, fingers twisting the edge of her sweater. I'm Sophie. They stood there for a second, two children measuring each other. Then Lily's eyes dropped to Sophie's wrist. You make stars too? Lily asked, pointing at the paper bracelet. Sophie's face brightened. You know how? Lily grinned and ran to the table. I'll show you. They sat cross-legged on the floor, colored paper spread between them. Lily folded with practiced ease, hands quick and sure. Sophie followed, slower, concentrating hard. The room filled with soft sounds. Paper creasing, small bursts of laughter when a fold went wrong. Evan watched from the kitchen doorway, chest tight in a way that surprised him. Claire stood beside him, arms folded loosely, her expression unreadable. She's calmer, Claire said quietly. Since last night. Evan nodded. Kids remember who makes them feel safe. Claire looked at him then. Really looked. Grant Halden did not like surprises. When Claire returned to the office later that night, he was waiting, jacket draped over a chair, fingers steepled. You met with the janitor, he said, not asking. Claire didn't deny it. His name is Evan. Grant sighed softly. Claire, I understand empathy, but you're blurring lines. The board is already uneasy. They'll survive, she said. Grant's smile didn't reach his eyes. You're underestimating how closely they watch you, how long I've spent keeping them comfortable. The implication hung. There, years of quiet influence, favors called in, problems smoothed over before they reached her desk. Don't let emotion steer the ship, Grant said gently. That's not why they trust you. Later that night, as Claire drove home through falling snow, Sophie slept in the back seat clutching a paper star. Back in the apartment, Lily held up her finished creation. This one's for you, she told Sophie. It means someone's thinking of you. Sophie smiled and slid it carefully into her pocket. The moment shattered when Evan's phone buzzed. He stepped into the hallway to answer. The message was brief, formal, carefully worded. Pending review, your employment status may be subject to extended suspension. Evan closed his eyes. When he returned to the living room, Lily looked up immediately. She always knew. Dad? She asked. Did you do something wrong? Evan swallowed, forcing a smile that didn't quite settle. No, sweetheart. But the question lingered in the warm air, unanswered. On the table, 2 paper stars lay side by side, small, fragile, and suddenly heavy with meaning. The meeting invitation arrived at 8:30 in the morning, stamped mandatory and confidential. Evan read it twice before closing the email. He dressed carefully, Clean shirt, pressed jeans, as if neatness could soften what was coming. Lily watched from the kitchen table, swinging her feet. The paper stars she and Sophie had made scattered like fallen constellations. "Am I walking you to school?" she asked. Evan hesitated, then nodded. He wanted the normal rhythm. He wanted one more thing to stay where it belonged. The conference room on the service floor felt smaller than it should have. 3 people sat across from him. A thin folder lay open, its contents arranged with a precision that suggested a story already decided. "We've reviewed your file," one of them said. "There are concerns." Evan kept his hands flat on the table. "What concerns?" They slid the folder toward him. Old performance notes. A write-up from years ago, framed without context. A mention of an incident that had ended with Evan escorting a confused visitor back to the lobby, now described as boundary confusion. "It's about judgment," the voice continued. "Patterns." Evan looked up. "I stayed with a child who was alone." "We're not relitigating that," another said. "We're assessing risk." The word settled heavily. Risk was a shape that could be molded to fit anything. "Effective immediately," the first voice said. "Your employment is terminated." Evan felt the room tilt. He thought of Lily's backpack by the door, of the heating bill still unopened, of the quiet promise he'd made himself not to let one night unravel their lives. He stood without arguing. Arguing, he knew, rarely changed endings. Outside, the city moved on. Snow had stopped, leaving the streets bright and exposed. Evan walked the long way home, breath steady, steps measured, as if composure were a bridge he could cross one careful plank at a time. By afternoon, the pressure arrived from another direction. Not a threat, not a warning, just a request for updated information, phrased politely, wrapped in concern. Evan understood what it meant. Stability mattered. Paper trails mattered. He set the phone down and stared at the wall until the edges blurred. Across town, the board convened in a room where the lights were dimmed to avoid glare. One desk lamp burned at the center of the long table, casting sharp shadows. Claire sat straight-backed, hands folded, listening. "Public perception is fragile," a board member said. "We can't afford ambiguity." "The internal review points to a security lapse," another added. "A lower-level technician. A procedural failure." Grant Halden inclined his head, the picture of calm. "We've identified a likely source. It's contained." Claire's eyes flicked to the screen. The report was thorough, convincing. It named a security employee who had worked the corridor that night, cited a scheduling error, a temporary override. It made sense. Too much sense. "If the issue is resolved," Claire said, choosing her words, "why does it feel unfinished?" Grant smiled faintly. "Because you're close to it." He leaned in, voice low. "Claire, this is where leadership matters. We protect the institution. We don't personalize." The ticking of the wall clock grew louder. Each second landed like a metronome counting down something irreversible. Later, Claire drove to the school. Sophie was waiting by the front doors, backpack slung low, eyes scanning the lot. When she spotted her mother, she ran. In the car, Sophie was quiet. She traced shapes on the fogged window, then spoke without looking up. "I miss Evan." Claire kept her eyes on the road. "You can't see him right now." Sophie frowned. "Why?" "Because things got complicated." Sophie considered that. "He didn't leave me," she said finally, "when everyone else did." Claire's hands tightened on the wheel. That evening, as the city settled into early darkness, Claire stood in her office with the lights off, the skyline a scatter of white points beyond the glass. She opened the report again, scrolling slowly. The explanation held. The red herring did its work, tugged her toward relief. Still, something tugged back. She thought of the door in the corridor, the way Evan had kept it open. Thought of Sophie's voice, small and certain. Thought of her own memory years ago, a door closing with a soft, decisive click. She turned on the desk lamp. Its light cut a circle through the darkness, isolating the clock, The report, her hands. The clock ticked. Grant's words echoed. We protect the institution. Claire closed her eyes and breathed. Safety was a system. Trust was a risk. She had built her life on one and starved the other. Her phone vibrated. A message from Evan, unsent and unsaid, seemed to live between the lines of everything. She'd read that day. She imagined the paper stars on his table. Fragile, unofficial, honest. Claire opened a new window on her screen. Not the report. Not the summary. The raw logs. Outside, the wind rose, brushing the building's skin. Inside, the lamp hummed softly, a lone island of light. Claire reached out and shut the report. Then she leaned forward and began to look for what the system didn't want her to see. They did not meet in offices anymore. Claire suggested the place herself. A quiet diner near the river, open all night, the kind where no one asked questions and refilled coffee without comment. Evan arrived first, sitting in a booth by the window, watching the reflection of passing headlights slide across the glass. When Claire walked in, she didn't look like a CEO. No tailored authority. Just a woman who had decided something and was prepared to live with the cost. Thank you for coming, she said, sliding into the booth. I didn't have much to lose, Evan replied, not bitter, just factual. They didn't talk about apologies. They didn't talk about trust. They talked about facts. Evan described his nights in detail, the cadence of his routes, the doors that were always locked, the ones that sometimes weren't. He spoke about the executive floor the way a sailor spoke about currents. Subtle shifts only someone inside the pattern would notice. There are doors that shouldn't ever open, he said, and doors that open when someone wants them to. Claire listened, recording nothing, memorizing everything. The conference room door was wrong, Evan added. Not broken, not forced, just wrong, like it was meant to look accidental. Claire's eyes sharpened. That night, she accessed the internal audit systems herself. Not summaries, not conclusions. Raw data, timestamps, permission trees, access hierarchies layered over years of incremental changes. The server room was dim and cold, the air thick with the steady breath of machines. Racks of blinking lights stretched like a city turned inward. Claire stood alone between them, coat folded over her arm, the glow of her tablet lighting her face. She followed Evan's instincts with numbers. The red herring unraveled first. The low-level security employee's access ended exactly where it should have. The override hadn't come from below. It had come from above. The permissions, trail bent upward, quiet and deliberate, masked by administrative authority that no one thought to question. Grant Halden. Claire paused when she reached the name, her reflection faint in the glass. Of the server rack. Grant had been with the company longer than she had. Longer than most of the board. He had helped write the systems everyone else relied on. And years ago, long before Claire's tenure, there had been an internal discrepancy. A minor compliance failure buried in archived reports. Not enough to break laws. Enough to break careers. Grant's son had been listed as present during a site inspection that never happened. A signature where a witness should have been. A door quietly closed on a mistake before it could breathe. Claire felt something shift in her chest. Not surprise, but understanding. Grant had learned the same lesson she had. Protect what's yours. Control the narrative. Only he had chosen a different door. She met Evan again 2 nights later, this time in his apartment. Lily was asleep in the next room, the paper stars still taped to the wall above her bed. Sophie's star hung beside them now, slightly crooked. Claire noticed everything. This wasn't about you, Claire said finally. Or Sophie. You were collateral. Evan leaned back against the counter. I figured. He couldn't let the system be questioned, she continued. If one door was wrong, others might be too. And he used a child to hide it, Evan said quietly. Claire didn't correct him. The silence that followed was heavy, not hostile. 2 people standing on the edge of something. That would not forgive hesitation. What happens now? Evan asked. Claire looked at the stars on the wall. Paper thin, easy to tear, still holding their shape. There's a Christmas shareholder meeting, she said. Public, recorded. He won't expect me to move there. Evan's brow furrowed. If you do this, they'll come after you. They already are, Claire replied. They just haven't said it out loud yet. She turned to him. I need you there, not to speak, just to be present, to remind me what this started with. Evan nodded slowly. I'll be there. When Claire left, the apartment felt different, charged like a held breath. That night, Grant stood alone in his office, reviewing agenda notes. The city glittered below, indifferent. He paused at the calendar entry, marked shareholder meeting, holiday session, and frowned. Something was off. Across town, Claire sat in her darkened living room, the tablet on her lap, Sophie asleep on the couch beside her. The child's fingers curled around a paper star, creased and worn. Claire whispered, not to Sophie, not to herself, but to the quiet room. Some doors were built wrong, she said, and someone has to open them anyway. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall again, soft and persistent. The machines would keep running. The lights would stay on. But the wrong door had been found, and it was about to be opened. The room was full. That was the first thing Evan noticed as he took a seat near the back of the auditorium. Rows of investors, board members, legal advisors. Faces composed, voices low, coats folded neatly over chairbacks. A Christmas wreath hung at the side of the stage, tasteful and restrained, like everything else in the building. Lily sat beside him, her legs not quite touching the floor. She wore the blue sweater her grandmother had bought her, the one Evan saved for important days. This is an important day, right? She whispered. Evan squeezed her hand. Yeah, it is. The lights dimmed slightly as Claire Whitmore walked onto the stage. She wore a simple dark suit, no ornament, no softness added for the season. The room quieted, the way it always did for her. She stood still for a moment, hands resting lightly on the podium. Thank you for being here, she began. I asked for this time because transparency matters, especially when it's uncomfortable. A murmur rippled through the audience, quickly stilled. Claire nodded once to the technician. The screen behind her lit up. The video was grainy, pulled from an internal camera feed few people in the room had ever seen. A conference room late at night. A man in a janitor's uniform standing in the doorway, deliberately keeping it open. Then Sophie appeared, small, frightened, curled beneath the table. The room went utterly silent. Evan felt Lily's fingers tighten around his. On screen, Evan knelt, lowered himself to Sophie's level. He took off his jacket, wrapped it around her shoulders. He didn't touch her again. He didn't move closer. He stayed where she could see him and where anyone else could see them both. The video ended. Claire faced the room again. This is what actually happened, she said evenly. Not a risk, not a failure of judgment, an act of care. She gestured, and the next slide appeared, clean, precise charts layered with timestamps and access trails. Our internal audit found that the initial explanation was incorrect, Claire continued. The camera interruption did not originate from a security technician. It originated from an executive level access point. A breath passed through the room, controlled, disbelieving. Claire didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Specifically, she said, from an administrative permission held by our Chief Operating Officer. Grant Halden sat very still in the front row. The screen shifted again. A timeline appeared, years compressed into lines and arrows. A single deviation highlighted in red. This permission structure was originally implemented to obscure a compliance failure several years ago, Claire said. One that involved falsified oversight using a family member as a shield. Grant's jaw tightened. He stood slowly, as if the room itself were pressing him upward. That's enough, he said. This is not the place. This is exactly the place, Claire replied. She turned to him, not with anger, but with something sharper. You protected the system by sacrificing the truth, she said. And in doing so, you taught your own son that loyalty meant silence. Grant's composure finally cracked. Just a fraction. Enough. The board chair rose. Mr. Halden will need to suspend. I know, Grant said quietly. He looked down, not at Claire, but at the floor. I know. The room remained silent as he sat back down. Claire took a breath. Effective immediately, she said. All actions taken against Evan Cole are rescinded. His record will be formally corrected. His name cleared. Evan didn't move. The words didn't land all at once. They arrived slowly, like warmth returning to fingers gone numb. Claire turned, searching the room until she found him. I also owe you an apology, she said, and now her voice changed. Not weaker, but human. I chose process over people. I was wrong. Evan stood. Not because he was asked to, because Lily tugged his hand. Sophie had slipped free of her seat and was already running down the aisle. She reached Evan and wrapped her arms around his waist, holding tight. I kept the door for you, she said into his jacket. Evan knelt and hugged her back. Careful, steady. Lily stepped closer and slid her hand into her father's again. Her smile was small but fierce. Around them, the room exhaled. Some people clapped. Others didn't. It didn't matter. The stage lights brightened gradually, warming the space, softening edges. The wreath caught the light and gleamed. Claire watched from the podium as Evan stood with the two girls beside him. One by blood, one by choice. For the first time in years, the room felt larger instead of closing in. As the meeting adjourned, conversations buzzed cautiously, like a system rebooting. Claire gathered her notes, her hands steady. Everything had been said, or almost everything. As Evan and Lily headed toward the exit, Lily looked up at him. So, she asked, are we okay now? Evan looked back at the room, at Claire, at Grant surrounded by lawyers, at the open doors letting light spill into the hallway. We're better than okay, he said. Behind them, Claire stood alone on the stage for a moment longer. The lights still warm, the room still echoing. The door was open. Whether it stayed that way was the next question. Winter didn't end all at once. It loosened its grip slowly, the way hard things usually did. Evan's life settled into a new rhythm that felt steadier but not effortless. He was given a position with regular hours, better pay, and something he hadn't realized he'd been missing until it returned: predictability. The job came with a uniform that fit and a schedule he could plan around Lily's school calendar. Still, whenever he stepped into polished buildings with glass walls and echoing floors, his shoulders tightened without his permission. Old instincts didn't disappear just because the world apologized. Claire noticed. She never commented on it. She had her own battles to fight. The board hadn't forgiven her boldness. They tolerated it. Meetings stretched longer. Decisions required more explanation than before. She was still CEO, but the margin for error had narrowed, and she knew it. Some days she came home drained in a way success had never prepared her for. They didn't rush anything. Their connection grew in the quiet spaces between obligations. Shared coffee after school drop-offs, brief walks that ended before they grew too meaningful, conversations that stopped just shy of promises. It wasn't dramatic. It was careful, respectful. Sophie adjusted too. She laughed more easily now, though she still watched doors. Lily learned to recognize when Sophie needed space. And when she needed company. They didn't call each other sisters. Not yet. But they shared paper stars taped along the hallway wall, a constellation made by two children who understood something. Fragile together. On a clear December night, snow began to fall again. Not heavy, not urgent, just enough to soften edges. Claire arrived at Evan's apartment later than planned, coat dusted white, breath visible as he opened the door. Lily was already there, standing on a chair by the window, reaching carefully toward the glass. Dad, she said, pointing. It's starting. Evan smiled and stepped aside to let Claire and Sophie in. Warm air wrapped around them, carrying the faint scent of cinnamon and laundry soap. The apartment looked much the same as it always had, modest, lived in, real. Claire set a small box on the table. "I didn't bring anything extravagant," she said. "Just something I wanted you to have." Evan opened it slowly. Inside lay a simple key. Not new, not old, polished smooth by hands. Etched into the metal was a small outline of a door, slightly ajar. Evan's breath caught. "I had it made," Claire said. "For perspective." He lifted it, feeling its weight. Honest, solid. After a moment, he reached into his pocket and drew out another object. A key of his own, older, worn, attached to a ring with a faded tag from the building he once cleaned. "This one opens my place," he said. "It's not much." Claire met his eyes. "It's everything." They stood there for a moment, snow brushing the windows, time slowing just enough to notice. Then Evan spoke, quietly, carefully. "Doors still close," he said. "They always will. Jobs end. Positions change. Trust gets tested." He turned the key over in his palm and held it out to her. "But we've learned something," he continued, "that even when a door can close at any time, we can choose to hold it open." Claire took the key, her fingers brushing his. She didn't answer with words. She didn't need to. Behind them, Lily climbed down from the chair and held up a fresh paper star, its edges still sharp from the fold. She taped it gently above the doorway. "Snow is a promise," she said, as if stating a fact everyone should already know. Outside, the flakes caught the streetlight, glowing gold against the dark. The city felt quieter, kinder, just for that moment. Evan reached for the door. He didn't rush. He held it open while Claire stepped through first, Sophie close at her side. Lily followed, tugging her coat on, excitement humming beneath her calm. Evan paused at the threshold, looking back once at the small room that had held them through fear and hope alike. Then he stepped out too. The door closed behind them with a soft click. Not final, not heavy, just the sound of something at rest. Snow fell gently, settling on shoulders, on hair, on the quiet certainty of four people walking forward together. Not because the world had become perfect, but because they had learned how to face it together.